Michael Jackson was leaving Sony as a free agent owning half of Sony. Mike owned half of Sony's publishing, and that's what caused bad blood between Sony and Michael. This was years before he was killed. A lot of people don't know this, but Michael was trying to buy Marvel and Universal. See, every time an artist is close to getting out of their contract and owning their publishing, they either killed or locked up. They're not even hiding it no more. Think about the money that companies make when an artist dies. It only makes sense for these greedy companies to kill them off and squeeze every penny out of them to their last breaths. See, Michael Jackson helped Little Richard get out of his publishing rights back when his record company at the time lowballed him with a bad contract deal. Michael started building his catalog when Michael was working his 1982 classic album Thriller. See, Thriller is the best-selling album of all time, with sales of 70 million copies worldwide. But while he was working on this album, Michael would also work with the legendary Beatle Paul McCartney. And while they were collaborating, Paul would inform Michael about the lucrative business that was buying publishing rights for musicians' catalogs. Paul McCartney and other legendary Beatle John Lennon were the original owners of the Beatles' publishing rights, collecting all of their royalties from their massive hits. But in 1969, their royalties would be sold for poor management decisions. Paul always wanted to own his music and his legendary catalog, and when his catalog was no longer in his hands, Paul McCartney would start to buy other artists' catalog, building a portfolio which led to information he gave Michael. In '85, the Beatles' catalog was back up for sale, and Michael Jackson would outbid John Lennon and Paul McCartney's wife for the Beatles' catalog and all of ATV for $47.5 million. A decade after the initial deal, Michael Jackson sold 50% of ATV to Sony for $95 million, creating a music publishing company, Sony/ATV. Today, the company owns the rights to the Beatles' songs as well as those from artists like Bob Dylan, Marvin Gaye, Taylor Swift, just to name a few. Mike owned a lot, and he was moving so mean, he became too powerful for the industry. And Eminem dissed Michael in the song Just Lose It in 2004. 3 years later, Michael Jackson's company, ATV, purchased the publishing company, Famous Music, for $370 million. No one had the bread to help Eminem. Not Dr. Dre, not Jimmy Iovine, not nobody. In 2007, Michael had owned everything Eminem released, including his song that he dissed him. Eminem never received his catalog back until 2016. That was 7 years after Michael Jackson had been killed. Eminem dissed Michael, and Michael bought his whole life's work. And this is nothing new. Michael Ben had money like this. Jackson purchased a 2,700-acre property in 1988 for $17 million and spent the estimated $35 million turning the estate into an amusement park, complete with a zoo, theater, a train station, go-kart, hella shit. Mike had the money, and Mike had outsmarted the industry, and his contract with Sony was up. Michael had owed Sony a box album, and then he would be out of his contract. Michael would be leaving Sony, owning half of Sony, then eventually buy off the other half. Now, Sony wasn't finna let him go. They knew he wasn't going to re-sign, and to the public, they made it seem as Michael can't complete a box album for whatever reason. A lot of people don't know this, but that reason is because Michael Jackson threatened Sony to move on to another label. Jackson's contract with Sony Corp guaranteed him an unprecedented share of the profits from his next 6 albums, his own record label, a role in developing video software products, and a shot at movie stardom. The contract, the biggest ever awarded to an entertainer, and is expected to return hundreds of millions of dollars to Jackson's. Michael Jackson's estate and Sony Music Entertainment paying the biggest deal the music industry has ever seen. And for Michael Jackson to not be able to complete a box album in 8 years is impossible. Quincy Jones, producer of Thriller, said that Michael wrote just under 800 songs for the album. Now, from 91 through 2001, up until when he died, he slowed it down a bit. Michael said he wrote about 120 songs per album. So they don't want to release his last album. Michael owned Sony Entertainment, Motown, Epic Records, Sony Music Publishing, Sony BMG Entertainment, Legacy Recordings, MJJ Music, Steeltown Records, and Sony Records. Not to mention the endorsement deals, side personal businesses, properties, and other artists' catalogs. Michael owns the same industry that he generates revenue to from his entertainment, so the industry was not taking advantage over Michael due to his ownership. Michael had a 22-page document on all the acts he owned. He owned the Beatles. Michael owned 50% of all country and western music. He owned 50% of Bob Dylan. He owned Babyface. He owned Beyonce Knowles. Michael Jackson owned Boys to Men. The list is 22 pages long, and it's in alphabetical order. And Sony thought Michael's mind was focused on music, singing, and dancing, which it was. But aside of being a great performer, they didn't think Michael would outsmart them in business. But he did. And that's why they never let him release his last album. Sony was never going to let Michael out his contract so that he could own the whole company. So they kept postponing it. At this time, Michael was very vocal about the situation. And not only he the greatest entertainer of all time, Michael Jackson was one of the greatest revolutionaries of all time. He should be more respected as such and never forgotten. He preached so many wonderful messages. He cared about everybody. He wanted the world to have good vibes, peace, and equality. Whether you white or black, you're still a human being. You deserve to be treated with respect. So, songs like They Don't Really Care About Us, which is still true to this day. Lyrics like Skinhead, Deadhead, We Are the World, We Are the Children, We Are the World Tour. Michael Jackson was unifying the people and putting an end to racism and finna own all of Sony. He was taking legal action, and they didn't want a black man having that. They didn't want a black man having that type of power, that type of ownership. This is the reason they felt the need to kill Michael, and all of a sudden he's found dead inside his mansion, saying the cause of Michael's death was determined to be cardiac arrest caused by an overdose of the sedatives he regularly consumed. They love to make it seem like as if you killed yourself on accident or on purpose in your own home or hotel room, but they really murdered the artist, all alone injecting them with poisons that shows is giving them cause-like symptoms and the autopsy report to feed the articles. Sony was never going to let Michael Jackson out of that deal. After Jackson's death at 50 years old, Sony Music took full control of the catalog 7 years later, with Sony/ATV agreeing to pay $750 million to the late performer's estate in order to buy out the remaining 50% stake in the company's. The Beatles catalog alone has now been estimated to be worth in excess of $1 billion. The doctor that prescribed the medicine, Conrad Murray, was sentenced to only 4 years on voluntary manslaughter, but got released after serving 2 years. That's not voluntary manslaughter, more like intentional murder. That doctor ain't even the one who killed Mike. Sony had Michael killed. So yeah, man. It's the story of Mike versus Sony and the reason why they took him out.